Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered why a part of you still feels incomplete, like something essential was never quite handed to you? It's not always easy to name. It doesn't scream. It doesn't break things. It lingers quietly. A discomfort in your chest when you think of your childhood. A hesitation when someone gets too close. A fear that if people really saw you, they'd leave. That's not coincidence. That's a wound. A wound we rarely talk about, the wound left by your father. Not all wounds come from violence. Some are born in silence. Some are shaped by absence or by presence that never truly saw you. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. Even a good father can leave scars because it's not just about what he did. It's about what he couldn't do, what he didn't know how to hold, and what he passed down without even realizing it. Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious power of our parents, not just in how they raised us, but in how their shadows became the ghosts we now carry. The father especially becomes not just a man, but a force. He shapes how we see structure, strength, approval, protection. And when that foundation is cracked, everything we build on top of it trembles. Maybe your father was kind but distant. Maybe he was critical. Maybe he simply wasn't there. Or maybe he was there but never truly with you. And so you learn to earn love, to stay small, to walk on emotional eggshells, just to feel safe. And now, decades later, that child still lives inside you, still reaching, still hoping, still wondering, was it me? Was I not enough? Remember, it was never you, but healing doesn't begin with blame. It begins with recognition. Until you understand the role your father played, not just in your past, but in the emotional script you now live by, you will keep reliving the same patterns, expecting someone to fill a space only you can confront. This is where the real healing begins. In Jungian psychology, the father is more than a man. He is an archetype, a symbolic force that exists in all of us, shaping how we relate to structure, power, rules, and ultimately, to ourselves. Think of the father not as the person in your life, but as the first gatekeeper between you and the world. He is often the one who teaches boundaries, what's allowed, what isn't. He becomes the law, the voice that tells you this is who you are, or this is who you should be. And if that voice was harsh, absent, or inconsistent, it doesn't fade with time, it imprints. Carl Jung believed that the father archetype holds a crucial role in the psyche's development. It is through the father that we internalize authority, identity, and personal direction. But what happens when that archetype is wounded? When the father was broken, silent, controlling, dismissive, or simply too lost to guide you? You grow up unsure of your own foundation. You rebel against rules that were never explained, or you rigidly follow ones that were unfair. You may fear leadership, distrust structure, or sabotage anything that feels too secure. Why? Because part of you still associates order with abandonment or oppression. And yet, ironically, you crave it. You crave stability. You long for someone or something to tell you it's okay to rest. This is the paradox. The very structure you needed to feel safe is now the thing you run from. And so, the unconscious repeats itself, over and over, until you meet the father within. Jung's path was never about blaming your parents. It was about recognizing the deeper layers within you. The father figure isn't just behind you in time. He's alive in your decisions, your voice, your inner critic. And until you confront that internalized archetype, you'll keep living a story that was never really yours. Understanding the father archetype isn't just psychology, it's survival. Because to reclaim your identity, you must first rewrite the law that was written without your consent. Only then can you become your own authority. Only then does healing begin to take root. Before you knew who you were, you looked into someone else's eyes to find out. And often, that someone was your father. He wasn't just a man. He was your first mirror. The first one to reflect back to you whether you were enough, whether you mattered, whether you were worthy of attention, affection, or simply being seen. And in the absence of words, you watched his gaze. You read his silence. You studied his reactions like sacred texts, trying to decode what made you lovable or what made you invisible. When he smiled, you lit up. When he withdrew, you shrank. Not because you did something wrong, but because that's what children do. They take everything personally. His approval became a compass, his disappointment, a storm cloud you carried long after the sky had cleared. Maybe he never said, "I'm proud of you." Maybe he did, but only when you performed, achieved, obeyed. So you learned to strive, to please, to mold yourself into what you thought he wanted. And what you didn't receive, you buried it deep, layering it with independence, sarcasm, or stoic silence, just like he did. That's the quiet inheritance, shame that doesn't speak, but shapes, pressure that doesn't scream, but suffocates, silence that doesn't break, but bends everything inside of you. You measured your worth by how much space you were allowed to take up in his world. You internalized the conditions. And now you might find yourself repeating them, seeking partners who withhold, bosses who belittle, friends who only love you when you're useful. Not because you want to suffer, but because part of you still believes, if I can earn their approval, maybe I'll finally be enough. But you were always enough. He just didn't know how to reflect it back to you. And now, the mirror is yours to hold. You can finally stop asking it to show you something he couldn't give. Because healing begins the moment you stop chasing the image he couldn't see and start recognizing the truth you've carried all along. There are fathers who leave, and then there are fathers who stay, but never truly arrive. You could hear his keys in the door, smell his cologne, see his place at the table, and still feel completely unseen. Absence isn't always physical. Sometimes it wears a suit and tie. Sometimes it sits across from you in silence. Sometimes it speaks in monotone, answers with nods, avoids your eyes, and calls it being a man. And for a child, that kind of presence is more confusing than a flat-out goodbye. You learned early, don't expect too much, don't ask too many questions, don't show too many feelings. Because every attempt to connect was met with a wall of stoicism. Maybe he thought he was protecting you. Maybe no one ever taught him how to hold space for vulnerability. Maybe he was carrying wounds of his own. But all you knew was the cold echo of emotional distance. And so, you adapted. You stopped sharing the things that mattered. You stopped reaching out. You became self-reliant, not out of strength, but out of necessity. You became quiet, compliant, or maybe even angry, because emotional hunger turns into all kinds of things when you have no language to name it. Carl Jung believed that what we do not make conscious will continue to control us, and the emotionally unavailable father becomes the seed of unconscious confusion. You crave intimacy but flinch when it comes. You long to be known but fear being too much. You're not sure whether love is supposed to feel safe or just silent. This is the paradox of the silent father. He gives nothing, yet his absence says everything. And for years, you may have thought it was your fault. That if you were more impressive, more agreeable, more something, he'd finally open up. But here's the truth. His silence was never a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of his wounds. And now, you get to choose something different. You get to name what was never named. Feel what was never allowed. Say what was always swallowed, not to punish him, but to free yourself. Because the hunger for emotional connection doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And your healing begins where the silence ends. Somewhere along the way, love became something you had to earn. It wasn't given freely. It came with a price, a perfect report card, a quiet demeanor, a goal scored, a chore completed without being asked. You learned that affection wasn't guaranteed. It had to be triggered. And often it was triggered only by success. If you achieved, he smiled. If you failed, he withdrew. He may not have meant to, but your nervous system learned the pattern. And so, love became a transaction, not a truth. You stopped asking, "Am I lovable?" and started asking, "Am I doing enough?" This is how conditional affection poisons self-love. It wires you to associate your worth with doing, not being. And years later, that pattern doesn't just vanish, it morphs into overachievement, into perfectionism, into never feeling satisfied no matter how much you accomplish, into relationships where you overgive and wait. Wait for someone to finally say, "You're enough now. You did it. You're safe." But that moment never truly arrives, does it? Because when love is taught as a reward, it becomes a performance. You're always auditioning, always rehearsing lines that were never yours to begin with. And underneath it all, there's a quiet exhaustion, a soul that is tired of proving. Carl Jung believed that what we fail to integrate, we act out. And this is what happens when we internalize a father's conditional love. We start to mirror it on ourselves. We become our own harshest judge, our own absent parent, our own withholding voice. But here's the truth you were never told. You don't have to perform to be worthy. Your value was never in the trophies, the grades, the obedience. It was in your existence, in your breath, in the child who once stood wide-eyed, waiting for approval, not realizing she already had value simply by being alive. Healing begins when you stop trying to earn love and start reclaiming it, not because you've done enough, but because you are enough. Have you ever wondered why you keep ending up in the same story, just with different characters? Why love feels like a chase, why success never feels safe, why someone's silence still stings like a bruise from childhood? That's not random, that's repetition. And according to Carl Jung, what we do not make conscious, we repeat as fate. The unhealed father wound doesn't just stay in the past, it shapeshifts into lovers who withdraw, bosses who never acknowledge your worth, friends who demand loyalty but give none in return. You're not choosing them consciously, but somewhere inside, the child in you still thinks, if I can win love from someone who reminds me of him, maybe I can finally heal the part he left behind. This is projection. We project the unresolved feelings we have toward our fathers onto the people around us, hoping, begging, sometimes silently screaming for a different outcome. But the wound doesn't heal through reenactment. It only deepens. Every rejection reopens the door. Every dismissal reawakens the ache. Every betrayal echoes the same ancient cry, "Why wasn't I enough?" And this is where things get dangerous, because now you're not just chasing love. You're reliving abandonment. You're reenacting the very script you were born into, not because you want to, but because it's familiar. And the familiar often feels safer than the unknown, even if it hurts. Jung taught that the father archetype governs law, order, and identity. When it's wounded, we lose our internal compass. We second-guess our worth. We search for external validation to anchor what was never affirmed inside. But what if the cycle could stop with you? What if your awareness could interrupt the unconscious? You are not doomed to repeat the story you inherited, but you are responsible for waking up inside of it. When you start to see your patterns, not with shame, but with compassion, you reclaim your power. You begin to choose partners who see you, work that values you, boundaries that protect you, and you stop looking for your father in people who were never meant to carry that role. Because healing doesn't mean rewriting him. It means no longer needing him to finish your story. There's a part of you you don't show, a part you were told to bury, a voice that was too loud, a feeling that was too much, a truth that was too dangerous to speak. That part is your shadow. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, everything we reject, deny, or suppress within us. And for many of us, the shadow is shaped in our earliest relationships, most often with the father. When your father left you feeling unseen, unworthy, or unloved, there were emotions you weren't allowed to express. Rage, too much, grief, too messy, longing, too vulnerable. So you tucked them away. You smiled instead. You performed. You carried on like nothing was missing. But the body never forgets, and neither does the soul. What wasn't expressed didn't disappear. It sank. It became impatience, perfectionism, cold detachment, or maybe it turned into people-pleasing, self-abandonment, fear of confrontation. And without realizing it, you started living from the very shadow you were trying to avoid. This is the negative father complex, the echo of unresolved pain that becomes part of your identity. You become your own punisher, your own judge. Or you project your father onto every man who crosses your path, expecting the same abandonment, the same criticism, the same silence. And the worst part? You start to believe that the wound is who you are. But it's not. It's just a story you weren't allowed to finish. To integrate the shadow of the father is to finally face the unspoken, to allow the grief to move, to name the rage without shame, to hold the longing without making it wrong, not to lash out, but to let go. You are not broken for feeling what you were never given the space to feel. And the shadow isn't your enemy. It's your unacknowledged truth waiting to be seen. When you face it, you stop being haunted by what you had to hide, and you begin to heal in the light of your own wholeness. It's a strange moment, the day you realize your father was human, not a superhero, not a villain, just a man, with his own wounds, his own fears, his own story that started long before you ever arrived. And maybe that's where the deepest healing begins, not in the blame, but in the understanding. Carl Jung often spoke of intergenerational trauma, the pain that gets passed down silently like an unwanted heirloom. Your father didn't just raise you, he inherited you, along with the expectations, the silence, the emotional templates handed down by his own father and his father before him. Maybe he never heard "I love you" growing up. Maybe he was taught that emotions were weakness, that real men don't cry, that duty comes before connection. And so, he did the best he could with what he had, even if what he had wasn't nearly enough. This isn't to excuse the harm. This isn't to erase your pain. Some of the wounds he left were real, deep, unjust. But seeing his brokenness doesn't minimize your experience. It simply expands your vision. It allows you to understand that his failure to love you properly wasn't always about you. It was about his own inability to love himself. He was likely at war within, fighting battles he never spoke of, wearing masks he forgot he was wearing, and sometimes, when a man is carrying that much internal weight, he passes it on without meaning to. Understanding this doesn't mean inviting him back into your life. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means recognizing that some of what you're healing didn't even start with you. And with that realization, something shifts. You stop expecting an apology from someone who never learned how to say sorry. You stop trying to fix a past that doesn't want to be rewritten. You put down the burden of trying to save him, and you begin the process of saving yourself. Because compassion isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from being chained to their pain. He was wounded, but you don't have to carry the wound forever. You're allowed to end the story where it hurts you and begin a new one that finally honors who you are becoming. There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize your father is no longer a god, not the towering figure from childhood, not the voice of absolute truth, not the standard by which everything must be measured. Just a man, flawed, fragile, sometimes kind, sometimes distant, sometimes trying, sometimes not. And in that moment, the spell begins to break. You see, we spend so much of our lives swinging between extremes. He was everything, or he was nothing. He was the reason we are strong, or the reason we are broken. But Carl Jung taught that healing doesn't happen in extremes. It happens in integration. To truly heal, you must let go of the myth. Your father wasn't meant to be perfect. He wasn't designed to fill every emotional need, answer every question, or hold you without ever letting go. And he also wasn't meant to be your villain, your burden, your excuse for never trusting again. He was not God. He was not the devil. He was just a man. Maybe a man who tried and failed. Maybe one who didn't try at all. Maybe one who showed up halfway and called it everything. But once you release the illusion, once you stop idealizing or demonizing, you create space for truth, for complexity, for the kind of emotional honesty that doesn't need to blame or worship, just see. And when you see him clearly, you begin to see yourself clearly too. Because every time you put him on a pedestal or buried him in resentment, you were still defining yourself in his shadow, still letting his story write yours. Let it go. He doesn't need to be perfect to be forgiven. And you don't need to keep carrying his image to become whole. Just let him be what he was, a man with limits. And let yourself be what you are now, free to write the rest of your life without his myth guiding your every move. Sometimes it's not your father's presence that stays with you. It's his voice. Not necessarily the one you heard aloud, but the one that etched itself into your inner world, the one that questions your every decision, the one that tightens your chest when you rest, the one that whispers, "not good enough," when you finally feel proud. Carl Jung spoke of the internalized parent, the psychological imprint that lives on even after the body is gone. And for many, this voice becomes the invisible authority, the constant judge, the unseen critic steering the wheel. You grow up, but his expectations stay. His silence stays. His disapproval or absence becomes the standard by which you measure every interaction, every success, every failure. You might even think it's your voice now. But is it? That hesitation before you speak your truth, was that you, or the memory of not being heard? That guilt when you choose rest, was that your intuition, or the echo of being told you're lazy when you slowed down? We live under the gaze of our fathers far longer than we realize, not because they ask us to, but because we never learned to look away. And yet, you can. You can confront that voice, question it, challenge it, replace it. You can create a new voice, one that is steady, kind, discerning, but never cruel. A voice that says, "You're safe now." A voice that listens instead of judges. One that comes from your truth, not your conditioning. This isn't about erasing your father. It's about reclaiming the space he unknowingly occupied inside your mind. It's about no longer letting a ghost sit in the front seat of your life. Because you are no longer the child who had to earn approval. You are the adult who gets to choose whose voice matters. And yours is the one that matters most. We're told to forgive, to let go, to move on, to rise above it. But what no one explains is what that really means, especially when it comes to your father, especially when the wound runs deep and the apology never comes. Let's be clear. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's not inviting someone back into your life who keeps showing you they can't handle your heart. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, is something much quieter. It's not for him, it's for you. It's the act of putting down a sword you've been holding so long, your hand forgot how to unclench. It's choosing not to let bitterness build a house inside your body. It's saying, "I deserve better," and then living like it. Carl Jung understood that true healing doesn't require reconciliation. Sometimes the people who hurt us can't change. Sometimes they won't. And sometimes they're not here to say what we always wanted to hear. That's the brutal part. But it's also where the liberation begins. Because waiting for someone else to validate your pain is just another form of bondage. The freedom is in knowing. I can name what happened. I can hold it, grieve it, and let it move through me. I can forgive, not because he asked, not because he deserves it, but because I no longer want to carry what he left behind. This is not about letting him off the hook. It's about unhooking yourself. You don't need a phone call. You don't need a final conversation. You don't need him to say what he never could. You need only this, the truth of your own experience and the decision to no longer let it define your worth. Forgiveness isn't a door you open to let him back in. It's a gate you walk through to free yourself. There's a part of you that longs to feel strong, directed, clear, grounded. It's not about gender, it's about energy, about the balance inside you between being and doing, chaos and order, softness and strength. Jung called this the integration of the masculine and feminine within the psyche. And for many, the father wound disrupts that balance before it ever begins. When the masculine was absent, abusive, or unstable, We internalized it as a threat, as something untrustworthy. We either reject it entirely or we over-identify with its shadow. We fear discipline. We resist structure. We shy away from leadership because we associate power with harm. Or we swing the other way, becoming rigid, controlling, armored, because softness never felt safe. But what if the masculine wasn't the problem? What if it was simply misrepresented? The true masculine isn't domination, it's direction. It's not aggression, it's presence. It's the ability to protect without control, to lead without ego, to act with integrity, not force. If your father distorted that energy, it's no wonder you struggle to trust it. But the wound doesn't have to be the end of the story. You can reclaim what was twisted. You can rebuild your inner masculine, not from fear, but from wholeness. You can become your own safe container, your own inner protector. The one who says, "I've got you," when life gets hard. The one who keeps promises to yourself, who follows through, who holds the line with compassion and power. And when you do that, something shifts. You stop outsourcing your stability. You stop fearing your strength. You stop waiting for a man or anyone else to make you feel safe, because you've built that safety within. And in doing so, you don't just heal the wound, you transform it. The father may have failed to teach you how to embody healthy masculinity, but now you get to show yourself what it truly looks like. There's a sadness you carry that has no date, no obvious wound, no funeral to attend. It's the grief of what never happened, the embrace you never felt, the words you never heard, the steady hand that never came when you needed it most. This grief is silent, but it's heavy. And for many, it's the final door to open, the one we avoid because naming the absence makes it real. But the truth is, you can't heal what you refuse to mourn. Maybe your father was alive, but emotionally unreachable. Maybe he tried, but his love came wrapped in fear, anger, or control. Maybe he was never there at all, and so you grew up with a hunger you didn't know how to name. You got used to the emptiness. You learned to call it independence, strength, maturity. But underneath it all, there's still a child wondering, why didn't he choose me? Carl Jung reminded us that individuation, true self-realization, requires facing our pain, not avoiding it. And this grief? It's sacred. It's the portal to your freedom. Because until you grieve the father you needed but didn't have, you'll keep looking for him in lovers, in mentors, in strangers who remind you of home and heartbreak all at once. You don't need to wait for permission to feel this. You don't need to justify it with stories worse than yours. Loss is loss, and what you didn't receive still hurt. So cry for the childhood that deserved more. Rage for the boundaries that were never protected. Sit with the ache, not to drown in it, but to finally let it pass through you. Grief isn't weakness. It's a declaration. I mattered. My needs mattered. My heart deserved to be held. And once you allow yourself to grieve, something begins to soften. The chase ends. The proving stops. And in that stillness, you find peace, not because the wound never happened, but because you finally let it be seen. There comes a time when you stop waiting for the father who never arrived, and instead, you become the one you've always needed. This is what it means to reparent yourself, not in theory, but in practice. It means stepping into the role he never filled and offering yourself the very things you were once denied: stability, support, protection, belief. Not as fantasy, but as choice. Carl Jung taught that we carry within us all the archetypes, not just the child, but the father too. You don't have to keep playing the part of the abandoned one. You can rise. You can become the inner authority you've spent your life searching for. It begins with small things, showing up for yourself consistently, speaking to yourself with firmness, but never cruelty, creating boundaries not to punish, but to protect, becoming the voice that says, "I've got you, you're safe." We don't abandon ourselves anymore. This isn't a quick fix. It's a slow rebuilding of trust, one decision at a time, and at first it may feel unnatural, foreign, even fake. because when you've spent years internalizing the absence, presence can feel unfamiliar. But keep going. Be the father who keeps promises, who shows up, especially when it's hard, who doesn't disappear when you fall apart, but leans in and says, "We'll get through this." That is the masculine reborn inside of you, not the wounded version that commands or controls, but the healed version that protects without fear, leads without force, and loves without condition. You are not broken for needing this. You are wise for choosing it. And the more you become this for yourself, the less you crave it from others. Not because you don't still long for connection, but because you are no longer starving for someone to save you. You've become your own foundation. And from that place, everything changes. Wholeness was never about perfection. It was never about having the ideal father, the perfect childhood, the flawless emotional blueprint. Wholeness is not the absence of wounds. It's the integration of them. The decision to say, "This happened, and I'm still here." Carl Jung believed that true healing, what he called individuation, was the process of becoming fully yourself. Not the version shaped by survival, not the echo of your parents' unmet dreams, but the version forged from conscious awareness, truth, and self-responsibility. That's what this has always been about. Not rewriting the past, not erasing the father wound, but facing it completely, courageously, so it no longer controls you from the shadows. You've walked through grief. You've unmasked the voice that lived in your head. You've released the impossible fantasy of who he should have been. You've become the father you never had. And in doing so, you've stepped into your own authority, one that isn't harsh or withholding, but present, loving, and deeply rooted in truth. This is liberation. Because now, when you speak, it's not to be approved of. It's to be real. When you choose love, it's not to fix something broken. It's to share something whole. When you stand up for yourself, it's not rebellion. It's reverence for the child who once had no voice. You return to yourself, not as a child searching for answers, but as an adult who carries the answers inside. And yes, the wound may still ache sometimes. There may be moments when you feel the old pull, the old hunger, but now you meet it with presence, not panic, with tenderness, not shame. That is the sign of wholeness, not that the wound disappeared, but that it no longer defines your direction. You have become more than your pain. You have stepped out of the legacy that shaped you and into the self that is finally, unmistakably, yours. So take a breath. You've made the return. And you didn't just heal the father wound, you reclaimed your life. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.